isn't that our prayer? That God's kingdom would come and His will would be done. I don't know about you, but there's many a day that my prayer is, Jesus, come quickly. But we want for all those that God still knows that need to be saved, that He's invited to be saved. So it's a catch-22 for us, isn't it? We want Jesus to return. We want Him to wait so that no one should perish, which is His prayers or His wish as well. Well, I don't know about you, but God doesn't do the predictable, and God doesn't necessarily do things as I think He will or should. Yes? So I always ask what's next, right? So we're back to Romans 12, 1 and 2, but we'll get to Act 3 today. So we might go some other places as well. But I don't think we're done. And I think partially we're not done with that. Because you can't do those two verses in a Sunday for a few minutes and hope that you've got it down. And so my question to us, to myself, and to you is, how did you do? Did you make that choice to present your body a living sacrifice? Or have you done it in the past? Did you remember that day that you said, yes, this is it? Not just yes to Jesus, because that's that first step of salvation, but yes to Him as Lord, which is a whole different level, and presenting our bodies, saying, here I am, all of me. Body, soul, and spirit, heart, mind, will, and emotions. All of me, and I'm putting it on the altar. It's yours. All yours. And then choose to live that life. Holy and acceptable, which is our reasonable service. For me, the series through Romans 12, the title is We're on Our Way, or On Our Way, because there is more that God has for us. No matter how young we are, no matter how old we are, there's next steps with Jesus. Unless you look a lot like him, like almost 100%, there's more. And if you are that close, you're probably about to exit, which is fantastic. But we don't want to give up. And it is so tricky sometimes. But I think for today, the question, and maybe the title, if you will, is, what is God's will for your life? Isn't that the big question? What is God's will for me? We kind of want Him to give a very specific, this is what I have for you to do, or this is who I have for you to become, or X, Y, Z, right? Specific call, specific direction, and there may be that. But there's God's will, His overall good and perfect will, and Romans 12, 1 and 2 addresses that. And Paul says, and I'll read the text, I beseech you therefore, brethren, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service or worship, depending on translation. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will. What is God's will for our lives? Paul says, if you want to know, if you want to confirm, if you want to testify to, prove for yourself, test what God's acceptable and perfect will is, it starts by presenting your body as a living sacrifice. You're no longer your own, you're bought with a price, right? If you've said yes to Jesus. But then that means something very practical. How do we grow into living that out on a daily basis? It is by not being conformed to the world. And we talked about it last week, what some of things mean that we don't do. but being transformed by the renewing of our mind. We talked about that also. But part of not being conformed to this world is also things that we do as Christ followers that the world doesn't do. That makes us look like Jesus. So what are some of those things? What are some of the things that we ought to do that maybe the world doesn't do? Spend time in the Word. That's absolutely true. Hopefully daily. More and more. What's something else that we do?
Pray with our concerns to God.
Pray. And we did this as a community. That's all part of God's plan. Absolutely. What else? Is there something else that Christ followers ought to do on a regular basis that the world just doesn't do?
Go to church.
Share the Word, go to church, sure. Love, that's a big one, love. Exactly. How about forgive? What do you think? Is that something we ought to do on a regular basis? Like daily? We even sing it. Forgive us as we forgive others. Now maybe the world forgives when you are properly humble, come repented and confess, and you beg for mercy. Maybe the world forgives. But what's our condition for forgiving? When do we forgive? Always. Who do we forgive? Everyone. Do they have to ask for forgiveness? I was trying to find a loophole back in the day. Oh, some probably 20, 30 years ago, when somebody had greatly offended me and kept offending me. And they didn't say they were sorry, they just said, you have to forgive me, because I was a Christian. And I was thinking, I was like, certainly the Word says somewhere that they have to ask for forgiveness first. Not. Sometimes it is so difficult to forgive, right? But being not conformed to this world says, I forgive anyway. Now the best news, and I didn't know that 30 years ago, but I know it now, and I've known it for a little while, is that I don't have to feel it. I don't have to feel like I want to forgive, or I don't have to feel whatever forgiveness feels like. I have to choose it. I get to choose it as an action of my will. I get to choose to forgive. I get to choose to release that person. And I'm free. Bless you. Another thing that the world doesn't do is live in freedom, because they can't. But we can. We don't have to be conformed to the world. So one of the greatest traps for us as Christ followers and anybody, all humans, is shame. Shame is a horrible thing. And I was doing some studying on it. Apparently we learn it as early as 15 months old. We have the experience of being shamed, but we have no words yet. That's complicated. It's complicated from a healing perspective when you experience it before you can verbalize anything. And so shame is a huge tool of the devil, because if shame says, I am not good, I am not lovable, I am not worthy. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. Shame is difficult. And with guilt, we may act guilty. Anybody ever had an animal that knew that misbehaved? Our son's previous dog, Max, he used to like his shoes a lot, Harrison's shoes. So we'd come home and there would be one shoe in the basket. or you'd find it somewhere, and all you'd have to do is lift the shoe. You wouldn't have to do anything with the shoe, and he'd be like this. So that's more like guilt. I know what I did is wrong. I feel bad about it. But you can ask for forgiveness, and that can be free. But shame is not like that. Shame is I am bad. You know what people do when they feel shame? Do you run and go tell people? Is that the normal behavior? We isolate. We withdraw. Because if people knew, if people saw what I know, they would never want to be with me again. And it's a massive trap. It's a prison. It's chains. And it's a lie. Because if you're a Christ follower, who are you? Who does God say you are? He says, a child of God. So you are not good because you're good, but you're good because you're a child of God. What else does God say about us as His creation? He does.
He chose us.
He chose us. We're made in His image. That means I'm not bad. I am not unlovable. I'm not unworthy. Because the God of the universe says that He chose me. He chose you. And if God is for us, who can be against us? You know what the antidote is for shame? And we all have it. It's community. It's being in community and letting people in on this shame. Sharing, finding a safe person to share with and letting go. And so that's another thing that we can do to not be conformed to the world. I mean, one of the greatest challenges in this day and age is isolation. It's gone so much worse since the pandemic. Here in the United States, I think young people, it's like 75% feel lonely. Where as compared to in Europe, 12, 14, or 15%. It's a big difference. 20% in some cases maybe, but regardless, so many people alone. And isolation is the trap of the enemy, right? And so how else can we not be conformed? We can love when people are unlovable. We can show up. We can give. We can be a safe place where people can feel safe enough to share. We can not be conformed to the world by choosing not to judge anyone, especially not the family of God, at least not character or motives. If your behavior is wrong, then we're brothers and sisters in Christ. We're meant to call that out. Speaking the truth in love. Right? Biblical? Go by yourself. If you've been sinned against with another, if they don't listen, bring them to the church. But that is not what I'm talking about. It is not, if you don't, if something isn't our preference or something isn't the way we think it ought to be done or whatever, that we don't judge, but that we love, that we choose to believe the best, hope the best, see the best. That's how we cannot be conformed to this world and a living sacrifice. We can choose to obey Ephesians 4:29, which says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. That may be the easy part. Stop swearing. Stop saying nasty things. The next part of the verse is much harder. But only what is helpful for building others up according to those who listen. This will be a work in progress for me for the rest of my life, I'm pretty sure. I'm better than I was, but oh my. And isn't it the people closest to you that you reserve, that it's hardest to apply that verse to? And God keeps convicting me of that. So do not be conformed to this world. And we can keep thinking, what are other things that the world does? Yeah. You know, the world shames, the world guilts. We don't do that. We're going to stop doing that. Can we stop doing that as a community? Is that something good to do? To just say, we're not participating in that. We're going to be builder-uppers, not tear-downers. I know those are not words, but just go with it. But we're going to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. Metamorphosis. We're allowing God to transform our mind. Now that's where the word and prayer and gathering together and being community is super important, because we need to rehearse this. It's all good and well to sit here and say, hey, I'm going to let God transform my mind. But I'm going to do all the things I did before. Well, no transformation will be forthcoming short of a miracle. Which God can do. So often, as Christ followers, we stay trapped in the cage that Satan had us in, even though we've been set free. We're still in prison, even though the door is open. And I don't know if you've experienced it, but I've had somebody pray with me before, many years ago, and literally pull me out, like visibly. There wasn't a real cage, but you don't agree with the lies that have been spoken over you. Don't agree with the lies that the world tells us about who we are or how we should think. Live as a free Christ follower. So that means if, anybody else think it's awkward at times to say something nice or complimentary to someone just randomly? Anybody else think that's a little bit uncomfortable? Is that not strange if you think about it? Like, what's going to happen? Maybe they've never heard a compliment and they'll fall over dead. That would be bad. But, honestly, it is a lovely practice. So I want to challenge you this week. I'd like you to do at least one a day. But, I'll let you off the hook. You can do one a day. You can even do, 10 a day. Go for it. But at least one day this week, you're going to go up to someone and say something just nice to them. Now, no cheating. Don't all do it within the next 30 minutes after church and feel like you've checked it off your list. But that person that you appreciate, but you just always stop short of saying it, let's be transformed. You might be giving someone the greatest gift. One of the things that also helps with shame, but one of the things that transforms people the most, and so we're all broken people, right? Some are more broken than others, but we're all broken people. But one of the things that transforms people is when they're seen, when you notice them, and when you speak kindness over them. It's the true version of love to say, I appreciate you. You matter. When you did that, that really meant a lot. Be renewed in our minds so that we may prove, that we may demonstrate, that we may prove for ourselves and to others what is God's acceptable and perfect will. And what did Jesus tell us to do? To love one another as He had loved us, to love our neighbors as ourselves, and to love our enemies. That's His perfect will. Because that's how people will experience Jesus. We're meant to be the most joyful, cheerful, positive people, regardless of whether you ache or not. Because if this life makes no difference, why am I following Jesus? Smiling is a good thing too. When you just smile at someone, it's kind of contagious. They're grumpy or smiling. Sometimes they get offended, but That's a risk you might want to take. But usually it's contagious, and they smile and then passed on, and even just an act of kindness. So all this in verse 3, for I say through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself or herself more highly than he or she ought to think, but to think soberly as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. All this, Paul is saying, so part of this being transformed, the whole chapter is about living different. But the first and the most important component of that, as we have chosen to offer our body as a living sacrifice, as we strive to not be conformed to the world, but transformed by the renewing of our mind, is to also think of ourselves soberly as we ought to think. People fall in two categories usually. One is think too highly of ourselves. I'm all that. I'm all that. That's pride. That's not thinking of yourself soberly, but I think so often in churches we think of ourselves more lowly than we ought. I'm nothing. I'm supposed to be nothing. I'm supposed to be humble, yes. Servant, yes. But you still need to think of yourself soberly, which means accurately. There is stuff you're great at. Is it thinking of yourself soberly by pretending you're not? Dan, I'm going to call you out stuttering. You're a rocket scientist? Kind of? Engineer? I can promise you, Blue Origin or any other rocket company will not want me anywhere near anything that has anything to do with that stuff. But you're good at it. And soon your rocket might be launching, and you designed a part, and you're hoping, all engineers are hoping their parts aren't going to fail. They don't want to be the one, right? But that's what Dan is good at. Fred is great at numbers. Spreadsheets make my brain work, right? And so we're all good at something. But to pretend you're not good at that is not humble. It's false pride, which is still pride. Does that make sense? But it's not pretending you're good at something you're not. But thinking accurately. So if you're more mature in the faith, don't play that down. But pour into someone else. If you still have stuff to learn, don't play that down. Philippians 2 gives us a good model as to what that looks like. Let nothing be done out of selfish, verse 3. Let nothing be done out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, says NIV. But in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than themselves. So you still put the other first. That's part of being humble. Let each of you look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, he was the same as form, spirit, power, quality as God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. He knew he was equal. But he made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. Humility. Jesus didn't pretend he wasn't God. He knew. But he humbled himself. And that's the balance we need to strike as we think of ourselves soberly. God created you, me, the way he made us. We want to honor them. And yet we don't want to stand on it. So as part of being transformed, I want you to do a couple of things. Do the things we talked about. Love, right? Say something randomly nice to that person you need to say something nice to, that you know who they are. Think of ourselves soberly. Acknowledging who we are, but not pretending we're not. And then making sure that we treat each other with that respect, preferring each other. When we get back to what God has designed us to do, revival can come in our lives and around us. In Nehemiah 8, the people discovered they hadn't been following the Word of God, and they had Ezra the scribe read it from the morning to midday, like 6 hours they stood. And they realized they hadn't kept the Word, and they were convicted. And their response was, hang on, I'm finding it. Their response was worship and confession and wanting more of the Word, and God honored that. And as we progress through Romans, I want us to be ready and eager to live like living sacrifices. That's not here, that is every day as we go about, and we will look different. If we don't come to think of God differently today, but every day we follow Him, we gather to praise together, to shore up together so we can get back out on the battlefield. And so let's be those people. We're on our way, and we want to bring Him all the honor and glory and praise as we live as living sacrifices. Stop doing the things of the world. Do the things that God tells us to do. We can be transformed, but let's do it soberly, and let our light shine.